So, I want you to just imagine walking outside tonight and looking up at the night sky.
Always a good place to start, right?
Yeah, exactly. And when you look up, just consider this really haunting question. I mean, the math tells us the universe should be deafeningly loud.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking trillions of planets, billions of years of cosmic history.
Right. So by all basic statistical logic, our night sky should just be, a bustling interstellar highway. There should be signals everywhere.
But there's nothing.
Nothing. It is just dead silent. And the most terrifying explanation for that silence isn't just, well, it isn't that aliens don't exist. It's this possibility that intelligence itself is like a lethal mutation.
Yeah, it's the ultimate paradox, the Fermi paradox, right? We look at the sheer scale of the cosmos and the complete lack of any signal or megastructure or, I don't know, radio wave from another civilization. It creates this massive shadow over our own future.
Because it implies something stopped them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The silence implies there's a threshold out there that we haven't crossed yet.
And that shadow, that threshold, is exactly what we're wading into for this deep dive today. We've got a really fascinating stack of sources for you. We're looking at the notes, the transcripts, the research from the finale of the Time Traveler's Paradox series.
Such a profound finale, too. I mean, the way it pulls everything together.
It really is. And our mission today is to explore this concept known as the Great Filter. But we're going to do it by taking a route you probably wouldn't expect at all.
No, definitely not the standard astrophysics route.
Right. We're starting with the silence of the cosmos, sure, but we are going to travel directly from there into the physical neurobiology of the human brain. We're trying to uncover what it actually takes for a civilization to, well, to survive itself.
Which I know might sound to you like a completely arbitrary leap at first, but when you really dig into the underlying mechanics of both astrophysics and human behavior, the connection, it's incredibly direct.
It really shocked me how direct it is.
Yeah, because this isn't just some abstract philosophical thought experiment about little green men and flying saucers. Right, right.
It's a deeply practical, mechanical look at human adaptation. It's about the biology that dictates our daily decisions and, honestly, why the massive systems we live in today feel like they're just fundamentally cracking.
Yeah, and the source material makes this so tangible. Let's start with the filter itself, because the way this finale frames it, it makes the abstract math of the universe feel very, very visceral. There's this visualization in the notes, the million seeds analogy.
Yeah, that analogy is brilliant. So imagine you walk out into a fertile field, right? And you scatter 1 million apple seeds.
Okay.
Based on just the basic laws of biology and agriculture, you'd expect a forest to eventually grow.
Right, thousands of massive, healthy trees.
Exactly. But imagine you come back, say, 20 years later, you look across this massive expanse of land, and you see exactly one tree. Just one.
And see, you wouldn't just look at that single tree and think, wow, what a lucky seed.
Oh, of course not.
You would immediately look at the acres and acres of empty dirt and realize, oh, that isn't just dirt, it's a graveyard.
Yeah. You would instantly know that some catastrophic, invisible mechanism systematically eradicated the other 999,999 seeds before they could mature.
Exactly. Without a doubt that there is a filter at work. So translating that to the universe, the great filter is this theory that somewhere along the evolutionary timeline, between lifeless dust and a highly advanced spacefaring civilization, there is an evolutionary wall.
A barrier.
A barrier, or maybe a series of barriers that are so mathematically brutal that almost no civilization ever survives them.
So if we apply that to us,
right,
to humanity, where is that wall? Because if we're looking around and we literally don't see anyone else, that implies two very different realities for us.
Yeah, two very distinct possibilities. The first one is that the filter is already behind us.
Which is the optimistic one, right?
Super optimistic. It proposes that the leap from non-living matter to, say, the very first single-celled organism, or maybe the jump from single cells to complex multicellular life, is just unimaginably statistically rare.
Meaning Earth is the one tree?
Exactly. If that's true, we already made it through the hardest part simply by existing.
We won the cosmic lottery.
We did. But then there's the second possibility. And this is what the Time Traveler's Paradox finale really hinges on. What if the creation of life isn't a bottleneck at all?
Right. What if basic life evolves all over the place?
Yeah, life evolves, intelligence emerges, science advances, civilizations harness immense power, but the filter is still ahead of us.
And that means civilizations reliably reach a certain technological threshold, and then with near mathematical certainty, they just wipe themselves out.
It's terrifying, but yes, you look at the trajectory of any intelligent species, and the theory goes that eventually they unlock the ability to engineer their own destruction way before they develop the capacity to actually leave their home planet.
So intelligence isn't a survival trait at all, it's a ticking clock.
Precisely.
And when I read that in the notes, it just brought up this profound sense of existential dread. Because you realize we aren't just talking about asteroids or supervolcanoes taking us out. We're talking about threats that we literally invent.
Yes, once a civilization starts manipulating the fundamental building blocks of reality, the threats multiply exponentially. We're talking about nuclear annihilation, engineered biological pathogens, uncontrolled artificial intelligence.
Or even just a slow-motion ecological collapse, right,
Yeah.
from unchecked resource extraction.
Exactly. All of these are products of unmanaged intelligence.
But wait, let me stop you there, because this is where the logic feels like a trap to me. If life isn't mathematically rare, and the silence of the universe is caused by self-destruction, does the great filter imply that intelligence itself inevitably becomes a lethal liability? Like, is having a smart brain just a biological dead end?
I see why you'd ask that, but it doesn't mean intelligence is inherently lethal. What it means is that intelligence is an amplifier of power. And power, well, it always demands a corresponding level of control.
Right, okay.
The tension we're seeing, the reason civilizations stumble and fall, comes down to a very specific gap. It's the gap between what a species can do and what a species should do.
And the notes refer to this as the two legs of civilization, right? Knowledge and wisdom.
Yes, knowledge and wisdom. And you really have to look at how those two things scale over time. Knowledge is additive. It's exponential.
Because we build on it.
Exactly. If someone invents calculus, they can write it down in a book. The next generation doesn't have to reinvent calculus. They just read the book and they build on it.
Right.
Technology compounds.
Right.
Wisdom, however, does not scale exponentially. Wisdom is behavioral. It's experiential. Every single generation basically has to learn not to touch the hot stove all over again.
So you have one leg that is growing 100 times faster than the other leg.
Precisely. And when knowledge outpaces wisdom to this extreme degree, the civilization loses its balance. It enters this highly, highly unstable phase.
And the historical examples of this imbalance in the text are just stark. I mean, we figured out the complex physics required to split the atom, which is unbelievable godlike technological power, long before we possessed the geopolitical maturity to actually stop waging territorial wars.
Yeah.
Or, we built a global instantaneous communication network. But because our wisdom didn't scale with our fiber optics, that network is just routinely hijacked by our most primitive tribal instincts.
Oh, constantly.
Misinformation and outrage spread so much faster than truth, simply because the network was built for speed, not for discernment.
Right. But this is where we have to be really careful about how we assign blame. Because when we talk about nuclear weapons or autonomous AI or social media algorithms eroding democracy, the knee-jerk reaction for most people is to blame the technology itself.
Yeah, we treat the code or the uranium as if it has moral agency.
Exactly. We act like the tool is evil.
Which brings up my absolute favorite analogy from the finale. It compares our current civilization to putting a 5-year-old child in the controls of a supersonic jet.
It's such a visceral image.
It is, because if you're a passenger in that plane and it's in a terrifying nosedive, you don't blame the jet. The jet is a marvel of engineering. It's just obeying the laws of aerodynamics.
Right.
The crisis is entirely dictated by the fact that the responsibility of piloting the aircraft drastically exceeds the maturity of the pilot.
That is the perfect distinction. The technology isn't malicious. The aircraft isn't evil. It just removes the buffer between our impulses and our reality. So surviving the great filter, then, is not a technological test at all.
It's not about building better planes.
No. It is a biological and psychological test. Every intelligent species in the universe likely has to pass through this exact bottleneck, this incredibly dangerous teenage phase, where their raw power scales exponentially, but their collective judgment and impulse control develop at an absolute crawl.
Okay, so if we are the teenager in the cockpit,
Right.
desperately trying not to steer this civilization into the side of a mountain, how does a whole species force its wisdom to catch up with its power?
Well, you don't do it by looking out the window at the stars. You do it by opening up the pilot's manual.
I love that.
You have to look inward at the literal biological machinery that's driving the pilot. We have to examine the human brain.
And this is the pivot in the material that I just found so fascinating, bringing hard neurobiology into a discussion about the Fermi paradox. But it makes total sense. If the pilot is failing, you have to look at the pilot's neurological operating system.
Exactly. Taking a cosmic perspective doesn't make our earthly problems smaller. It actually provides a diagnostic lens to understand them.
Right.
The suffering on our planet right now, the friction that really threatens to become our great filter, isn't generally caused by a lack of resources or a lack of intellect. It's caused by the fact that the massive societal systems we've constructed are deeply, fundamentally incompatible with basic human neurobiology.
So let's dig into that biology. I mean, we all know dopamine is involved in reward and cortisol is involved in stress. But what these notes highlight is the actual mechanical mismatch between how those chemicals evolve to function and how our modern environment just brutally exploits them.
Yeah, let's start with dopamine because there's a huge misconception there.
Right. Everyone thinks it's the happiness juice.
Exactly. Most people casually refer to dopamine as the happiness chemical. Like you eat a piece of cake, you feel good, that's dopamine. But neurobiologically, that's entirely incorrect.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Dopamine is not about the reward itself. It is the neurochemical of anticipation. It rewards the pursuit. It rewards wanting, not having.
So it's the craving, it's the drive to go get the thing.
Yes. And from an evolutionary standpoint, that is a brilliant survival mechanism.
Yeah.
Imagine you're a hunter-gatherer living in extreme scarcity and you find a bush full of berries. Dopamine is what drives you to keep picking those berries even after you're full. Because if you were easily satisfied, you'd just sit down, stop foraging, and eventually starve when winter came. The brain was wired to constantly want more because more meant survival.
But then you take that exact same neurological hardware and drop it into the 21st century.
And it becomes a catastrophic liability. In a world of extreme material abundance, having an operating system that constantly demands more just puts you on an endless treadmill.
It explains so much.
Doesn't it? It explains why a billionaire can have enough wealth for 10 lifetimes and still obsessively structure their life to acquire more. It explains why we literally cannot stop scrolling on our phones.
The dopamine system doesn't know we're safe.
Exactly. It just knows how to crave. We've built an entire global economy predicated on infinite growth, driven by a neurochemical that literally cannot be satisfied. That is a straight recipe for resource exhaustion.
Okay, wow. And then, on the flip side of the reward system, you have the threat detection system, the amygdala.
The brain's alarm bell. And again, this was perfectly calibrated for a dangerous ancient environment. The amygdala scans the horizon for immediate physical threats, like a predator or a rival tribe.
And when it sees one, boom.
Boom. It triggers a flood of cortisol and adrenaline, your heart rate spikes, your blood rushes to your limbs, and you either fight or you run for your life.
But the key detail here in the notes is the duration of that response, right? Because in nature, that threat response is acute. It's fast. It lasts maybe 10 or 15 minutes. You escape the tiger or you don't. Either way, the cortisol recedes and the nervous system resets to its baseline.
Exactly. The system goes back to rest. But look at our modern environment. We are, generally speaking, relatively safe from apex predators. Yet the amygdala is still scanning. It is still hypervigilant.
Right.
But now, instead of tigers, it's reacting to an angry email from a boss, or a polarizing news alert, or fluctuating stock prices, or just the abstract constant pressure of social media.
So the brain reacts to an email the same way it reacts to a tiger.
Yes. The amygdala cannot tell the difference between a physical threat to your life and an abstract threat to your social status.
Which means the alarm bell just never shuts off.
Wow.
We exist in this state of chronic, low-grade fight or flight all the time.
And this is where the biology directly, mechanically impacts our ability to survive the great filter. When cortisol is chronically elevated, it doesn't just make you feel stressed out. It actually acts as a neurotoxin.
A neurotoxin.
Yeah. Chronic cortisol literally damages and shrinks the hippocampus, which is the region of the brain responsible for learning, memory, and complex emotional regulation.
Wait, really? It physically shrinks the learning center of the brain. I hadn't grasped how literal that was.
It is physically degenerative. When you're constantly in survival mode, the brain redirects energy away from long-term complex thinking and pushes it all toward immediate reactive survival.
Okay, this connects the dots perfectly for me. If navigating the great filter requires massive amounts of wisdom, cooperation, and long-term complex thinking, but our modern environment keeps our brains flooded with a chemical that literally shuts down our capacity for long-term complex thinking.
You see the problem?
We are essentially disabling our own navigation system while the plane is diving. We are running outdated evolutionary software that has become actively self-destructive on modern hardware.
It is a total operating system mismatch. And when an operating system is constantly crashing, you don't blame the applications. You have to look at the underlying architecture,
Right.
which leads to what the source notes call the infallible insight. We have to stop blaming individual humans for systemic architectural failures.
Yeah, the notes use a factory metaphor here, but I actually think the software one we're discussing works better. Like if you build a massive, complex IT network and every single computer on that network starts freezing, overheating, and crashing, you don't discipline the individual computers.
No, you don't.
You don't say, well, this computer just needs to try harder. You immediately realize that the network environment you've built is fundamentally incompatible with the hardware.
That is exactly it. And the network environments we're talking about are the massive inherited human systems we all live inside today. Think about our global economic structures, our educational institutions, criminal justice, modern healthcare.
And just to be completely clear to you listening, we aren't taking a political stance on any of these specific systems, left or right. We are strictly looking at how the research frames them as examples of massive structural architecture.
Exactly. This isn't about partisan politics. The point is that these systems were largely designed during the Industrial Revolution, and they treated human beings not as complex biological organisms, but as rational utility maximizers.
Right. Cogs in a machine.
They were designed to maximize output, efficiency, and compliance. They were absolutely not designed to regulate the amygdala or foster healthy dopamine pathways.
Not at all.
And so society just keeps exhausting itself by treating the symptoms. We medicate the anxiety, we build more prisons, we argue about tax rates, while completely ignoring the root cause, which is that the machinery of the system itself is fundamentally out of sync with our biology.
Okay, I have to push back on this underlying logic a bit. Because, if we are biologically hardwired by hundreds of thousands of years of evolution to be selfish, dopamine-driven consumers who are constantly terrified of outgroups, isn't building a better system practically impossible?
What do you mean?
Well, it sounds like you're saying the system is broken, but maybe the system is just a perfectly accurate reflection of our broken primitive hardware. Like, maybe utopian architecture can't fix a fundamentally flawed species. Aren't we just putting Band-Aids on it?
That is a very common and frankly a very cynical pushback, but it ignores the most defining feature of the human brain, which is neuroplasticity.
Okay.
The human brain is not a fixed, rigid hard drive. It is highly plastic. It literally, physically rewires its own neural pathways to adapt to whatever environment it is repeatedly exposed to.
So this is the blank slate theory in action.
Yes, exactly. We aren't inherently greedy, and we aren't inherently altruistic. We are inherently adaptable.
Okay.
If you place a human brain in an environment of extreme artificial scarcity, hypercompetition, and isolation, it will wire itself for paranoia and hoarding.
Because it has to survive.
Right. But if you place that exact same brain in an environment structured around psychological safety, collaboration, and meaning, the neurobiology adapts. The empathy networks strengthen. The amygdala calms down. The system dictates the biology just as much as the biology dictates the system.
Wow. Okay, so we aren't doomed by our nature. We're just currently trapped by our architecture.
Exactly.
But that still leaves us with a monumental problem. If the operating system of, say, global economics or global education is fundamentally flawed, how do we actually reboot it? You can't just unplug global civilization and start over. It feels overwhelmingly paralyzing to even think about.
It does feel overwhelming, but the notes make it really clear that you don't survive the great filter through a massive, fiery, top-down revolution.
You don't?
No, because revolutions usually just replace one broken system with another. The people leading them are still running the same stressed-out, hypervigilant neurobiology.
That makes sense. So what do you do?
Instead, you start with a deeply personal, localized, three-step shift in perspective.
And these 3 steps are really highly actionable for you listening. So step 1 is awareness.
Psychologists call it metacognition. It's the ability to observe your own thoughts. It's about recognizing the water you're swimming in.
Right.
When you're overwhelmed by the scale of the world's problems, you don't ask, how do I fix global capitalism? That's just paralyzing. Instead, you ask yourself one very specific question. What is one thing in my daily life that I have accepted as completely normal that I can now see is actually a choice?
Can you give me a concrete example of that? What does seeing the water actually look like for an everyday person?
Sure. It could be as simple as looking at the 40-hour work week. Or, the fact that you check your phone within 10 seconds of waking up to flood your brain with alarming news.
Oh, man, yeah. Guilt is charged.
We accept these things as gravity. It's just the way the world works. Awareness is the moment you realize These aren't natural laws. They are habits dictated by a system. And once you realize it's a choice, you reclaim your agency.
Which is so empowering. It takes this massive existential terror of the cosmic filter and it just shrinks it down to the footprint of your own daily routine.
Exactly.
Which brings us to step 2, connection. Why is this a mandatory step?
Because if you're the only one who sees that the system is broken, you don't change the system, you just go crazy.
Right. Isolation breeds despair.
It really does. But as we've established, our neurobiology is deeply fundamentally wired for social belonging. When we connect with others, our brains release oxytocin, and oxytocin directly counteracts cortisol.
Oh, wow. So community literally regulates our nervous system.
Yes. So once you see the water, you have to find a network of minds who see it too. You need a community that refuses to accept that chronic stress and systemic friction are just inedible facts of life.
So you basically need to plug your hardware into a healthier local network so it stops crashing.
Precisely. And that allows you to move to the final step, which is creation.
Building the new system.
But again, locally. You don't try to write a new global constitution.
Right.
You build a small, functional model of the world you actually want to live in.
Like a prototype.
Yeah, a prototype.
Yeah.
It could be changing how your specific team communicates at work to reduce that constant sense of urgency. It could be a neighborhood project. It can simply be changing the way you handle conflict in your own home to prioritize understanding over winning.
You're prototyping the new operating system in your own life.
Yes, because systems were not handed down from the heavens on stone tablets. Humans built them.
And if humans built them, humans can rebuild them.
Exactly. It's evidence-based, patient work that aligns with our biology rather than exploiting it.
Let's pull all the way back here and just look at the whole map of this deep dive. Because we started out looking up at the night sky, staring into the silence of the cosmos, wondering if the great filter is waiting to wipe us out.
We identified the terrifying gap between our rapidly accelerating technological power and our slowly developing wisdom.
Right, that dangerous teenage phase of civilization. But instead of just blaming the technology or blaming the jet, we looked at the pilot.
We dove into the neurobiology of dopamine and cortisol.
And we saw how our brains are running ancient survival software in a modern environment. We saw how the massive systems we live inside are fundamentally incompatible with our biology, which is shrinking our capacity to adapt.
But then we realized that because of neuroplasticity, we aren't doomed by our hardware. The massive systems that feel so crushing are ultimately just inherited architecture. They were just stories.
Which brings us perfectly to the core metaphor that the finale ends on. The quote is, "The cage was never locked. The lock was a story. And the story can be rewritten."
It's so powerful. We've been sitting in a cage, terrified of the silence outside, not realizing that the door is wide open. We just have to choose to walk through it.
That just completely flips the script. We aren't trapped. We just forgot we hold the key. Well, we really want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive, for following us from the edge of the universe down to the synapses of your own brain.
It's a wild journey.
It really is. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over. If the great filter is essentially a test of whether a species can align its immense power with its own biological wisdom,
Right.
and if neuroplasticity guarantees that our brains will literally rewire themselves to adapt to whatever environments we build, are we actually the first species in this silent universe capable of consciously engineering our own great filter?
Oh, wow.
And if we do have the power to rewrite the operating system to unlock the cage, what kind of environment will you choose to build tomorrow when you look up at that quiet night sky?